"We are giving your job to my cousin," the owner's daughter said. I nodded. 30 minutes after my shift ended, 10,000 conveyor belts went silent. The factory foreman called her office. "Tell me you did not fire the system calibrator." I knew something was off when I smelled burnt motor grease before I even stepped onto the floor. It was a faint, sour scent, like metal screaming in slow motion. Conveyor 2C was whining again, just a hair off alignment. If you knew how to listen, it sounded like a dying raccoon stuck in a tuba, but that was my rhythm. 19 years of it. I had worked through 2 recessions and 3 system overhauls, and the factory floor had become the only place in the world that made sense. My boots hit the same scuffed concrete at 6:40, 3 a.m., same corner coffee in hand. I gave the same nod to old Pete by the coolant tanks, who still insisted the vending machine stole his quarters on purpose. I did not argue. Some machines here were petty like that. The hum of the belts was my morning prayer. I had walked the length of hollow gates line like a surgeon doing rounds, except instead of heartbeats, I listened for hitches in gear timing, thermal expansion drift, and sensor lag. My fingers could read miscalibration like Braille. I had a log book thick enough to stop a bullet, full of entries in shorthand that only 3 of us still remembered. The other 2 were long retired or dead. It was just me now. The sense of creeping dread intensified as I walked past the junction behind Sector 7, where the new auto dashboard had glitched last week and nearly spat out a shipment of half-assembled toaster guts. That was Chloe's upgrade. She called it modern efficiency, which was rich coming from someone who thought a torque wrench was a TikTok dance. I noted the spike on the thermal readout again, an ominous flash of red. It was consistent with the slow creep of pressure building behind the overflow line. This was the exact flaw I had filed a detailed report on 2 weeks ago, a flaw that the new automation software had deemed a non-critical fluctuation. I mentioned the thermal spike to a floor tech nearby. He glanced up from his tablet, shrugged, and said, "Chloe said not to overthink it." Right. God forbid we overthink the 2,000 synchronized belts that kept the entire place from becoming a very expensive steel piata. It was not just about routine. It was a feel of breath. It was the absolute necessity of maintaining something vast and complex that felt increasingly hostile to my 20 years of acquired analog knowledge. I continued my round, forcing myself to maintain my slow, steady pace. I checked the pressure tolerance on the overflow line. It was 2 psi off, not enough to trigger an alert on Chloe's shiny dashboard, but enough to cook a batch of plastic molds by lunch if the pressure kept creeping. I made a manual note in my logbook, tapping the old analog gauge twice for good luck, just like Carl taught me back in 2006 when the floor flooded. I passed Debbie near the punch press. She handed me a roll of electrical tape without even asking. "Panel 9 again," she confirmed. I nodded. She smiled. That was how things worked around here. Quiet rhythms, muscle memory, trust. Our silence was comfort, and our silence was knowledge. But I was not naive. I had seen the writing on the wall weeks ago when the owner's daughter, Chloe, started slinking around in $900 boots that had no business stepping through a loading bay. She did not speak to us. She just filmed little reels for her manufacturing chick series or whatever garbage she was posting. Her favorite phrase was, "streamlining dead weight." The words felt like a direct hit to my ribs. I knew what that meant, and I was deeply afraid of being discarded like the old logbook I carried. My internal struggle, the fear of irrelevance, had never been sharper. I had built my whole life around this system, and the system's new owner saw me as a relic. That day I walked slower on my rounds, not to drag my feet, but to listen deeper. I took one more reading at Junction 5 where the hydraulic sink was always a twitch away from throwing off the main flow. The quiet buzz was off by a few decibels. Probably nothing. Probably. The tension inside me tightened. I was waiting for the storm. The feeling was inescapable. My hands, which had spent nearly 2 decades correcting the minute flaws of the machinery, felt clumsy and inadequate against the certainty that my time here was ending, not by choice, but by corporate fiat. I continued moving along the line, but my walk had changed from a confident patrol to a measured march toward a known fate. I had to focus now, not on maintenance, but on retrieval. I rounded the bend at Sector 5, the hydraulic sink station. The faint vibration of the motor was steady, but I tapped the housing with my knuckle. It was slightly colder than it should have been. This was the spot. I knew the manual valve could drift 0.8 degrees in cold weather, a fact unrecorded in any corporate manual, but deeply ingrained in my own knowledge base. That small drift was enough to throw the entire main flow off balance, eventually leading to seized gears and warped product. Chloe's new software could tell you the ambient temperature and the running speed, but it could not feel the subtle drop in pressure or hear the metallic whine that signaled distress. The system was designed to tell you what was happening after it had already failed, not before. I reached the terminal nearest the junction, a battered, older model that the IT department kept threatening to replace. I opened the casing where the diagnostic port was usually hidden. I pulled out my own flash drive. It was scratched, duct tape barely holding together, and looked like a relic next to the polished, fiber optic cables of the modern system. I plugged it in. The terminal, recognizing the legacy key, blinked green without demanding any credentials. This drive contained the last 20 years of my work, a Frankenstein mix of legacy configs, manual overrides, and patches I had coded myself when the new software did not account for belt lag or temperature fluctuations. The company's version was sanitized and simplified. Mine had critical notes in shorthand like, "Do not touch this unless you want to wake up to 300 rejected pallets and Pete screaming like a banshee." I copied over the core calibration suite, the foundational algorithms that kept the floor breathing. It was not company property. Not really. Half those configs were tweaks I had done myself over 2 decades, stuff that lived more in my head than in the mainframe. This was an act of self-preservation, a professional safety net. I was ensuring that if they chose to discard the mechanic, they would discard the entire engine along with him. I labeled the file, "If you really need me," zip, confirming the transaction with a final click. A cold sense of determination settled over me. This was the crucial action of my day, taken in silence, unknown to anyone but me and the responsive terminal. I finished my shift and ate a sandwich in the break room with 3 other people who did not say much. We did not need to. Our silence was comfort. Our silence was knowledge. I felt it then, like a pressure drop before a storm, a stillness in the rhythmic hum of the distant belts. It was the kind of unnatural quiet that tells a seasoned mechanic to grab a wrench before someone grabs a fire extinguisher. I just did not know that by the end of that shift, I would be walking out for what they thought was the last time, carrying the factory's literal brain stem in my pocket. I was tightening a mounting bracket near line 3 when the stiletto clack echoed like a goddamn threat. The sound did not fit. High heels on concrete in a place that smelled like scorched polymers and hydraulic fluid felt wrong, like a clown at a funeral. I looked up, and there she was, Chloe Hollowgate, dressed in a white blazer you could lose a mortgage payment to, rocking $900 boots that had never met oil. Phone in hand, selfie mode on. She was chirping something like, "Just another day at the legacy plant," to her gaggle of influencer friends. One of them, sipping something pink out of a protein shaker, actually asked if OSHA was a skincare brand. I kept my eyes on the bracket, feigning concentration, but I was listening. You always listen when people like that tour your ground, like they are scouting it for demolition. She pointed at the rusted catwalks and said, "It is like a grandpa's shed, right? So aesthetic." I could have laughed if I had not already spent 12 years begging upper management for safety rail funding that never came because profits were tight. They strutted past the precision tools like they were props, like the belts did not move 80 tons of product a day, like lives had not been broken and built in here. They did not see the expertise. They only saw the age. That sight fueled the betrayal, confirming every fear I had about being made irrelevant. Then I saw him. Cousin Jason. Fresh-cut fade, brand new steel toes that still had the stuffing in them, a button-up that had never met sweat. Chloe beamed like she had invented him herself. "This is Jason," she announced brightly. "He has just finished scaling a startup in Dayton, AI-based fulfillment optimization, super cutting edge. He will be shadowing our operations team while taking over some legacy roles. Legacy rollless." I felt that phrase hit me in the ribs like a crowbar. It was the sanitized corporate term for dead weight. One of the influencers turned to me, looking me up and down like I was a roach. She just remembered she had not stepped on yet. "Is that the gal you mentioned?" she asked. Chloe put her phone down, the smile instantly evaporating. "Oh, Corey. Hey." She looked bored, rushing through a script she already despised. "We are giving your job to my cousin." Just like that. No meeting, no paperwork, no HR sanitized send-off, or "we regret to inform you." I was standing there in grease, stained coveralls with a wrench in one hand, and my entire professional relevance was being chucked out like last week's cracked gaskets. No severance. No thanks. Not even a fake hug. I stared at her for a second too long. You could tell it made her nervous. Not because I am scary, but because I did not flinch. I wiped my hands on a rag, folded it slow, deliberately controlling the only thing I could, my reaction. "Be sure he knows where the manual valve override is," I said, my voice low and level. "It drifts sometimes in the cold." Jason gave me a smile that was all teeth and condescension, like I was a dog that had just barked funny. Chloe laughed. "Oh, I am sure the software will catch that kind of thing." I wanted to explain that the software only caught what it was programmed to see, and it had not been programmed to see 20 years of nuanced reality. But it was pointless. "Okay," I simply replied. I walked past them, logged my final entry in the calibration book, handoff denied. Recommend system audit. I slid it back into my desk drawer. I clocked out at 5:02. Nobody followed. I did not expect them to. I had the flash drive in my pocket, the core calibration suit safely stored. They thought they had discarded me, but I knew I had just walked away with the brain stem of their operation. This was not a defeat. It was a tactical withdrawal. I had lost the battle for respect, but I had secured the tools to win the professional war. Outside, the rain had started. Not a storm, just that steady, misty kind that soaks you slow and silent. I stood by my truck for a minute, listening to the factory hum like it always had, lights inside flickering. I smiled faintly. They had no idea what they had done. I was not just in the system, I was the system. Now, at my small house 4 blocks east and downhill, I sat by the open screen door listening. If the wind blew just right, you could catch the factory hum like a whisper through the trees. A soft, mechanical lullaby of belts, gears, and pressure valves clicking in unison. But tonight it sounded off. Not broken, not yet, just unsure, like a band playing without their drummer. I took a sip of lukewarm beer. For a second, I let it all wash over me, the insult, the years, the deep, professional grief of being discarded. I remembered my first shift at that plant 19 years ago. I was wearing knockoff work boots and a ponytail that still smelled like cheap conditioner. I learned fast, faster than anyone wanted me to. I memorized the rhythm of the belts before I learned half the employees' names. I outlasted 3 plant managers and 2 system overhauls. I trained people who were promoted over me, but the machines did not forget that hum. That hum knew me. It trusted me. I got up, walked to the junk drawer, and pulled out the old flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop, opened the calibration suite. There it was, the master file. I hovered over the file name, contemplating just deleting it, letting them drown in their pride. Instead, I confirmed the label. If you really need me, zip. They would need me. When the cold snap hit and the manual valve drifted 0.8 degrees too far, that is when they would call. At 5:29 p.m., it started. Conveyor 6 coughed like it swallowed a wrench. Not loud, just a metallic hiccup in the belly of the beast. Most folks would not have noticed, but old Pete, sweeping near the torque rack, froze mid-push. A minute later, Conveyor 7B stuttered, then surged. Not enough to stop the line, but enough to scatter product like confetti down the chute. A dozen hydraulic arms twitched out of sync, spilling molded casings into the collection bins like busted teeth. Nobody spoke yet because you never want to admit a system that big just flinched. By 5:47, 3 lines were flagged for recalibration. Jason had not noticed. He was still busy taking selfies in the control room with Chloe's overpriced tablet, grinning like he had cracked the Pentagon because he learned how to mute the alarms. Then 6 o'clock hit. 30% of the belts were off tempo. Load timings collapsed into a chaotic symphony of near misses and hot spots. Section 4 overheated. One temperature sensor read 0, another read 120. Neither was true, but the system, confused, obeyed the numbers. A junior tech ran to the terminal and tried a manual reboot. The screen blinked. Invalid credential. The terminal was not locked, but it did not recognize him or anyone. Nobody had revoked Corey's legacy credentials. The override token had been deactivated. Chaos was now baked into the floor's operation. Meanwhile, Chloe was standing in the upstairs office, completely unaware that downstairs was sounding more and more like a malfunctioning pinball machine. Jason tried to explain it away. It is just some legacy issue. The system is outdated. I was literally just talking to a guy in Dayton about migrating us to a smarter back end. Fine, smarter, Pete muttered on the floor as he unplugged a melting actuator by hand. Chloe flapped her hand dismissively. Tell it to hard reset the interface. Just reboot it. Pete looked up at her from the floor. His face, usually lined with indifference, was creased now with something sharper. You cannot just reset a mechanical system mid-load. It is not a Netflix app. This is a chain reaction. You reboot without sync, you burn the floor. Chloe, however, had already turned away, texting someone. By 6:08 p.m., the factory sounded wrong. The hum, the rhythm, it was broken, lurching. Half the sensors were offline. The AI assistant chirped like a wounded bird. The machines were still moving, but now they moved scared, offbeat, out of tune. I felt the vindication, but it was hollow. Watching my life's work self-destruct was a painful, professional grief. The chaotic sounds from the factory were growing louder, evolving past simple glitches into outright mechanical mutiny. I sat in my armchair, listening to the shift change and the growing, urgent tension in the air. The system was now officially fighting back. By 7:11 p.m., the first full line went dark. Not paused, not flagged, but dead. Conveyor 4C gave up the ghost with a high-pitched whine and a flicker of sparks as the auto brake failed to engage. The belt seized mid-load, backing up 2-feeder units and knocking 1,200 half-formed casings out of alignment. The failure was cascade and absolute. Then the real unraveling began. Over in Sector 9, a mechanical pusher fired prematurely, driving a finished unit clean through its packaging. The sound echoed through the massive building like a shotgun blast. Workers ducked. One operator hit the emergency stop, not because protocol told him to, but because instinct did. He was shaking when he stepped back. By 7:38 p.m., 6 lines were halted, 3 manually. 3 by mechanical fail, safes that had not tripped in a decade. The emergency shipment due for 8 o'clock, a contract deal with a major buyer that had penalties per minute written into the fine print, was not even halfway assembled. Jason had stopped pretending. His collared shirt was soaked through, hair stuck to his forehead, his tie wrapped around his hand like a pressure bandage for ego wounds. He was hunched at the console, flipping between tabs of digital schematics, each one more useless than the last. The AI optimization was optimizing nothing but panic. Where the hell is the override timing config? He barked into the empty room. Pete, who had climbed the stairs to relay information, leaned over his shoulder, squinted at the screen, and said flatly, "That is not even our model. That is the system they use at Hollow Gate East. Whole different load profile." Jason looked like he had just been told gravity was optional. He was operating in a theoretical world that had no connection to the one crumbling around him. Chloe stood at the glass office window, staring blankly at the mess below. She had not spoken in 10 minutes. The last thing she had said before the belt snapped near the cooling tanks was something about calling the vendor. No vendor was going to fix this. Not when the synchronization relied on handwritten notes kept in a battered 3-ring binder with coffee stains and duct tape, that same binder they had once laughed at and called a Boomer Bible. It was now locked inside Corey's desk drawer, right beneath the hand-drawn calibration map that showed how to re-prime the belt oscillators without frying the entire control system. Jason finally snapped. "We need her files." Pete did not look up. "Too bad you fired her," Chloe whispered almost to herself. He said something about valve drift in the cold. What did he mean? Pete turned slowly, his eyes boring into hers. "I meant the machines do not care what your app says. They care what Corey said." Jason's hands trembled. He pulled up a software override form, his last resort, and hit submit. He immediately got another credential error. The factory had locked him out again. Access denied. Legacy token conflict. I think he booby-trapped it. Jason gasped, finally grasping that the dismissed expert had built an impenetrable wall around his own knowledge. Greg, the foreman, chuckled, But the CFO, Phil, did not. Red lights blinked like Christmas in hell across the control room. The heat had climbed 6 degrees across the plant floor. By 8:05 p.m. the shipment deadline passed. By 8:17 p.m., union reps had arrived. By 8:22 p.m., Jason had officially stopped speaking. The factory had become the physical manifestation of professional incompetence, and I felt the powerful, cold satisfaction of total vindication. The owner called at 9:03 p.m., not a text, not a Slack message, but an actual phone call, something Robert Hollowgate had not done in years, unless someone died or the plant caught fire. Chloe answered on the second ring, her voice tight with a brittle, fake calm. "Hi, Daddy." His voice hit through the receiver like a rusted crowbar through drywall. "What the hell is going on at my factory?" She hesitated, then offered a practice corporate lie. "It is like a system glitch. Maybe an electrical fault. Jason is looking into it." There was a pregnant pause on the line. Not silence, but the kind of pause that tells you someone's eyes just narrowed in real life. I have got procurement breathing down my neck. Karen in legal screaming about breach clauses. Your mother texting me about influencer drama. Do not insult me with system glitch. Put someone competent on the phone. Chloe looked around. Jason was in the server room, hunched over the mainframe like a man reading his own autopsy report. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed above him. His expensive shirt was untucked, his face pale and streaked. He had, at some point, opened a can of red soda and spilled it on his lap. He did not notice. Greg, the night foreman, whose beard had seen more recessions than Chloe had seen job titles, walked into the office without knocking. He was not yelling, and he was not out of breath. That made it worse. He held his hand out for the phone. "Mr. Hollowgate wants someone competent here." Chloe froze. The foreman took the phone. "This is Greg," he said, his voice low, drawn across gravel. "You want the truth?" "Yes, sir." "Him a beat." "Yes, sir." "Him a beat." "Yes, sir, him." "Corey, we removed the one person who knew where the damn heartbeat was." Another pause. The sound of the owner processing the impossible failure. "No, she did not document everything," Greg continued. "Because not everything can be documented when you have got 20 years of calibrations done by feel, not code. Your daughter canned the brainstem of this floor and replaced him with a startup brat who could not find the load sync register with both hands and a map." Chloe opened her mouth to object. Greg held up a hand without looking at her, dismissing her like a dog barking at the moon. "No, sir, I am not being dramatic. Conveyor 6 collapsed mid-shift. Temp sensors failed. Emergency orders missed. We have got union reps counting minutes. And your cousin Jason." Greg pointed with his thumb toward the flickering server room. "He is crying in the dark, sir." Greg handed the phone back to Chloe, who did not take it. Instead, Phil, the CFO, an anemic man who rarely looked up from his spreadsheets, slid into the room. He carried a folder and a face like he had just read his own firing notice. "We need to call him," Phil said. Chloe blinked.
"Ooh, Corey."
Phil said softer now, like he was negotiating with a hostage taker. "If we do not fulfill those contracts by morning, it is breach territory. Not a slap on the wrist. Millions. Legal review. We will bleed for months." He held up a spreadsheet with a red box circled in marker. "And you know what I do not see in our burn rate? Catastrophic failure due to ego." Jason suddenly appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up. "Tried the override script. It locked me out again. It says access denied. Legacy token conflict. I think he booby-trapped it." Greg simply stared at Jason. Phil just sighed. Chloe's hands shook. She picked up her phone, hovering over Corey's contact. She did not dial, not yet. Because calling meant admitting something she had never said aloud, that someone older, quieter, less polished, and more essential than she would ever be, had built something irreplaceable. And tonight, it was all breaking because of her. The shift in power was absolute and humiliating. The call came at 6:40, 2 a.m. sharp. Not a minute earlier, not a second later. I was already awake, sitting at my tiny kitchen table in a robe that had seen better years, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that said, "World's Best Employee." The screen door was open again. Autumn wind curled in like a warning, and I could already hear it. The factory was not humming, it was coughing. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. I stared at it for a second, then picked it up and said nothing, letting the silence answer. Let him sit in the mess he helped create. It was my turn now. A familiar voice came through. Not barking, not corporate, just tired, like someone who finally realized he was sitting in a hole he helped dig. "Corey, it is Robert Hollowgate." Still I said nothing, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him sweat, not to be cruel, but to rebalance the scale. We did not realize, he continued, his voice low, stripped of every layer of executive polish, how tied everything was to your protocols, your work, or, he paused, exhaled, your rhythm. I closed my eyes and let the silence stretch until I knew he understood the full financial weight of the catastrophic failure. Finally, I spoke, my voice level and clear. "You realized. You just did not listen." He did not argue. He offered no excuses. He knew the cost. I took another sip of coffee, the warmth a sharp contrast to the cold air of this decision. "I will consider returning," I said finally, asserting control over my emotional arc. "But I have conditions." He did not hesitate. "Name them. We will meet them." "I will send a list," I replied. "One email, one time. You agree to it all, I walk back in. You push back on a single clause, you can watch the floor bleed until Q4. The line was quiet for a moment, then an acknowledgement of total defeat. I hung up, no pleasantries, no fake promises, just business, the way they always claimed they wanted it. I walked to my old laptop and opened a clean draft. Subject: return terms. Beneath it, I wrote 12 bullet points, no fluff, no begging, just facts that solidified my transition from avoided conflict to empowered authority. The list was absolute. Full reinstatement of prior role as systems calibrator plus operations consultant title. Compensation adjusted to match market plus 10%. Sole control of calibration protocols. Direct line to the CFO for budgetary needs. No interference from executive family. Then came the clauses dedicated to my revenge and the security of my work. Clause 7. Chloe Hollowgate barred from any operational input regarding systems management. Jason Hollowgate to be reassigned or removed. No executive family allowed in control rooms, maintenance bays, or calibration terminals. Legacy system backups to be stored securely under dual authorization, mine and the CFO's. No social media content creation permitted on the factory floor. The final clause was the ultimate safety net. Violation of these terms results in immediate resignation with full severance, retroactive bonus, and public statement of fault issued by executive office. I attached the single file "FAS if you really need me." Zip, and then I hit send. I did not check for a reply. I did not need to. If they wanted the factory to live, they would meet every line without question. And if they did not, well, I had peace. They had chaos. I had finally learned exactly what I was worth. The boots hit the concrete like they never left. Same scuffed toes, same oil, stained laces, same steady gait. I walked through the service entrance at 7:12 a.m. with the same silence I had 20 years ago. Steady, unbothered, and immune to the anxious glances from people who suddenly remembered who had held this place together. I did not pause to wave, did not nod. I walked with the kind of silence that speaks louder than panic. In one hand, my battered thermos. In the other, the flash drive wrapped in electrical tape, still warm from the pocket I had kept it in since sunrise. Chloe was not there. Her glass-walled office was dark. The nameplate was gone. No sign of the overpriced blazer or that hollow laughter that used to echo down the stairs like fake perfume. Just an empty desk and a feeling of abandoned failure. Jason was long gone, having struggled to figure out how to log himself out of the access system hours before. His last act on site was forgetting his iPad in the server room. I made my way past the calibration desk. Greg, the foreman, did not say a word, but stepped aside like a bishop parting for the high priest. Others watched. Debbie near the molding units, Pete behind his mop. When I reached my old workstation, the drawer opened with a soft clunk. My binder was still there, my logbook, my notes untouched and unread, like relics waiting for the priestess to return. I plugged in the flash drive. Legacy token detected. Override confirmed. The screen lit green. One by one, the machines exhaled. You could feel it in the air. The floor breathed. Belts shivered once sensed. Presses paused, recalibrated, and restarted in tempo. The temperature sensors corrected, the line map blinking from amber to green to full power. Conveyor 6 hummed like it had missed me. Greg watched, arms crossed, his mouth twitching like he did not want to smile but could not help it. Good to have the band back together, he muttered. I did not reply. Instead, I handed him a sealed envelope, thick, typed, and signed. The updated terms already agreed to, already executed. He flipped through the pages, his eyebrows lifting when he hit Clause 7. No family interference. He read aloud, permanent. I nodded once, then turned back to the console. The owner was waiting upstairs, I knew that. I knew he had probably rehearsed some speech about appreciation, about lessons learned, about how sometimes we fail to recognize greatness in our own backyard. I did not care. I would not be going up. Respect once taken is not bought back with flowers and guilt. It is earned. And today, they were finally paying what they owed. The floor clapped. Not a standing ovation, just 3 or 4 people. Slow, real, raw. Collused hands hitting grease-stained palms. The sound of quiet redemption. I did not smile. I just tapped the keys, eyes on the screen, listening as the system came back to life under my command. The hum returned, and this time it bowed to me. 1 week since the shutdown, the floor below moved like a synchronized animal again. Lean, quiet, precise. Across the bay window, movement caught my eye. Chloe, clipboard in hand, blazer button tight. No camera crew, no heels, no entourage. Just her walking stiff, backed along the top floor walkway, pretending to review a report. She slowed when she reached the glass above the bay. She saw me, paused, and for a second, just 1 second, her mask cracked. She did not scowl, did not glare, just looked, her eyes lingering longer than they should have. I did not move, did not nod, did not smirk. I just stood there steady as a pressure gauge, letting the moment stretch. Then she looked away and walked on. No words, no apology, no need. That was the victory. The real win was the silence where smugness used to be. The system ran smooth, not because it was coded right, but because it remembered who made it whole. Some systems do not run on code. They run on memory.